200 warships. That's what was coming. 200 organic vessels, living machines bred for one purpose, consuming everything in their path. Planets. Cities. People. Gone. Ambassador Lyra Solon stood in the center of the council chamber and tried not to let her hands shake. The chamber floated in deep space, a massive ring station built for diplomacy, for trade, for the illusion that the galaxy was a civilized place. Right now it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Please. Her voice barely carried. The Devourer fleet reaches our system in 30 days. My people have no weapons. No soldiers. No means of defense. We have only ever known peace. The Vael were old. Older than most species in that chamber. They had spent thousands of years building something beautiful, a water world of floating cities and deep oceans, a civilization that made art capable of moving any soul, a culture that had walked away from violence so long ago that the concept felt like mythology to them. They had never needed armies. They had never wanted them. Now that choice was about to kill them all. The insectoid delegate from Zareth clicked his mandibles. We sympathize, Ambassador. But our fleets are stretched thin. We cannot commit ships to a conflict this far from our borders. The Crystalline Collective agreed. The Devourers may target our worlds next. We must protect our own. One by one, the excuses came. Distance. Resources. Politics. The cold arithmetic of self-preservation. 17 worlds had already fallen. The galaxy had watched every single one of them burn. And every time, the Council had found reasons to look away. Lyra felt the last of her hope going cold. She had expected this. Hope just dies slow. If there are no further offers of assistance, the Council Chairman began, we shall move to, the Terran Federation offers aid. The chamber went completely silent. Every head turned. Every eye locked on the human delegate. Her name was Ambassador Nadia Voss, a stern woman with dark eyes that had seen things she didn't talk about. Humans were new here, barely 70 years since they'd achieved faster-than-light travel. The galaxy considered them strange. Too emotional. Too aggressive. Unpredictable in ways that made older species nervous. Lyra barely dared to breathe. You would help us? Nadia Voss stood. The Terran Federation does not abandon those who ask for help. We are dispatching assistance immediately. Expect our ships in 5 days. The Zareth delegate leaned forward. How many ships? The Devourer fleet numbers over 200 vessels. What can you possibly, enough ships, Nadia interrupted. She closed the channel. The chamber erupted in whispers. The humans were insane, everyone agreed. They would send a token force. Maybe help with evacuation. Maybe rescue a few thousand civilians before running. That was what any rational species would do. The Devourers could not be defeated. They could only be survived. Lyra returned to her world with a hollow chest. She had help, technically. But what could humans actually do? They were young. Their military was small by galactic standards. Their ships were functional but unimpressive. Still. It was more than nothing. More than anyone else had offered. 5 days later, Lyra stood in the orbital observation station with her military advisor, Commander Dallin Vor. They stared at the designated coordinates, waiting. They expected maybe a cruiser. A frigate squadron. Something symbolic. What came out of faster-than-light travel made Dallin drop his data pad. 3 ships emerged. The word ships felt completely wrong for what they were. The first was a carrier. 3 kilometers long. Its hull was a patchwork of old scars and emergency welds, the marks of a vessel that had survived things it wasn't supposed to survive. Launch bays lined its flanks like a wall of teeth. Point defense cannons bristled from every surface. Letters along its side read, "The Iron Meridian." The second was even larger, and it looked like nothing Lyra had ever seen. It resembled a factory more than a warship. Massive construction arms folded against its hull. Its cargo bays could have swallowed a city block. The name across its bow, Prometheus Ascending. The third ship was smaller than the other two. And it radiated something that made Lyra's skin crawl. Every line of its design spoke of exactly one purpose. Weapon ports covered every surface. Its main cannon ran nearly the full length of the hull. The name painted on its side in hard, unforgiving letters, Harbinger. "By the deep waters," Dallin whispered. "What are those things?" A communication request came through before Lyra could answer. A woman appeared on screen, 40s, sharp features, eyes that had been through too much and come out the other side harder for it. "Ambassador Solon. I'm Commander Zara Kovacs, commanding officer of the Iron Meridian. Permission to dock. We need to discuss defensive strategies immediately." Lyra blinked. "Commander, we appreciate the evacuation assistance, but," Kovacs looked genuinely puzzled. "Evacuation? Ambassador, we're not here to evacuate anyone. We're here to defend your world. Are you going to let us dock, or do we hold this meeting in open space? We have a lot of work to do and 25 days left to do it." 20 minutes later, Lyra sat in the Iron Meridian's briefing room with her advisors, surrounded by holographic displays of her entire planet. Human officers moved around them with the focused energy of people who already knew what they were doing. The room hummed with quiet intensity, the sound of a machine that had already started running. Kovacs stood at the central display. Her fingers moved through the three-dimensional image of Lyra's homeworld like she'd been studying it for days. Maybe she had. "We've completed our initial scans. Your planet has 3 major continents, 17 significant population centers. Orbital space is completely empty, no defense platforms, no military installations, no weapon emplacements of any kind. We are a peaceful people," Lyra said softly. "You were," Kovacs replied. "Not unkindly. The Devourers don't care about your history. They care about biomass. Every living thing on your world is a resource to them." She zoomed in on the largest continent. "We start here. My chief engineer is already preparing construction teams. First orbital defense platforms go operational in 48 hours. Dallin stared. "That's impossible. Construction like that takes months. Years." A massive man stepped forward. His uniform was stained with something Lyra couldn't identify. His name tag read Chief Engineer Tobias Webb. "Respectfully, Commander Vor, you've never watched human engineers work against a deadline. We built the Mars colonies in 8 months. The Titan shipyards in 3 years. When humans need something done fast, we make it happen." "But the resources," Lyra began. "The Prometheus Ascending is a mobile construction platform," Webb said. "She carries raw materials, fabrication systems, and 4,000 of the best engineers in human space. We also have mining drones that can strip your asteroid belt clean. Resources aren't the problem. Time is." Kovacs pulled up another display. "We also need to fortify your population centers. The Devourers will make landfall, they always do. We need bunkers, evacuation routes, and defensive positions. Your people will need to relocate to hardened shelters." Lyra felt helpless in a way she hadn't since she was a child. "Our people have never experienced war. They don't know how to hide." "How to, then we teach them," Kovacs said. No hesitation. No doubt. "Ambassador. I know this is overwhelming. Your people have lived in peace for generations. That's beautiful. That's worth protecting. But right now I need you to trust us. Can you do that?" Lyra looked at Kovacs. At her scarred hands. At the tiredness in her eyes that wasn't weakness, just the weight of someone who had carried heavy things for a long time and kept walking anyway. She saw something she hadn't expected. Not political obligation. Not hidden agenda. Genuine belief, this woman was here because she thought it was the right thing to do. Yes, Lyra said. We trust you. Tell us what you need. Everything, Kovacs replied. Landing coordinates for construction teams. Lists of every underground cavern and natural shelter on every continent. Civilian organization plans. And we'll need volunteers, people willing to learn basic defensive systems operation. They won't be soldiers in 25 days. But they can learn to push buttons. I'll put out the call, Dallin said, straightening. Webb grinned. It wasn't a happy expression. One more thing. Tell your people not to panic when they hear us working. Human construction methods can be loud. That turned out to be the greatest understatement Lyra had ever heard. Within 6 hours, human shuttles filled her skies. Construction crews descended on designated sites with equipment that looked more like weapons than tools. Massive drills carved into the earth. Mining machines extracted ore at speeds that didn't seem physically possible. Fabrication units ran without pause, without sleep, without stopping. The Vael people watched from windows and doorways, some in awe, most in terror. Explosions echoed across continents as humans used controlled demolitions to hollow out underground bunker complexes. The ground shook. Buildings rattled. Children cried. The humans kept working. Lyra visited one construction site 3 days in. What had been an open field was now a finished underground facility, life support, food storage, medical bays, communications. A young human engineer, her face covered in gray dust, paused long enough to explain the air filtration system to a confused Vael technician. See, the Devourers release toxic spores when they die. This filter catches anything smaller than 0.01 microns. Your people will be safe down here. You fought them before? The technician asked. The engineer's face changed. Once. Colony world called New Carthage. We lost. We lost a lot of people before we figured out how to fight them. She paused. That's why we're here. So you don't have to learn those lessons the hard way. In orbit, the transformation was even more dramatic. Where empty space had existed, defense platforms now floated, assembled at speeds that defied understanding. The Prometheus Ascending worked without pause, manufacturing components and assembling structures in real time. Lyra watched from the observation deck as another platform came online, its weapon systems glowing with fresh power. Commander Kovacs stood beside her, reviewing tactical data. 22 days left. We'll have the primary defense grid complete in 15. That gives us a week for testing and adjustments. Lyra stared at the platforms. Counted them. Commander. Why is humanity doing this? We can never repay you. We have nothing you need. Kovacs looked up from her data pad. For a moment, the professional face slipped, just for a moment. 70 years ago, humanity reached the stars and found out we weren't alone. That was wonderful. And terrifying. We also found out the galaxy can be a cruel place. She turned back to the window. Humanity has a saying. Those who can, must. We can help. So we must. She almost smiled. Besides, humans are very, very good at fighting. It's basically all we did for 10,000 years before we reached space. Seems a shame to waste all that practice. Below them, another explosion marked the completion of another bunker complex. Human engineers celebrated for approximately 4 seconds, then moved on. 20 days remaining. The orbital defenses were 70% complete. Underground shelters could house the entire population. Volunteer training had begun, though most Vael struggled with the concept of deliberately harming another living thing. The Harbinger remained in high orbit. Silent. Waiting. Lyra had asked Kovacs about it once. The Harbinger is our siegebreaker, Kovacs had said. Designed for one thing, breaking enemy formations. Her main cannon hasn't been fired in 30 years. She'd paused. Let's hope we don't need it. 15 days remaining. The Devourer fleet was detected at the edge of the system. Moving slowly, inexorably, toward Lyra's world. 200 bioships, each one a living weapon, each one carrying thousands of soldiers evolved for one purpose. The humans intensified their efforts. More platforms came online. More bunkers sealed. The Iron Meridian launched fighter squadrons for combat drills, the pilots weaving through orbital space in patterns too fast to follow. Lyra couldn't sleep. She wandered the corridors of the orbital station in the middle of the night, watching humans prepare for something she couldn't fully understand. They joked with each other. Shared food. Told stories about home. They were so alive, so impossibly full of energy despite the work and the weight of what was coming. She found Commander Kovacs alone in the observation deck at 3 in the morning, staring at the distant stars where the Devourer fleet was approaching. "Can we win?" Lyra asked quietly. Kovacs didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was honest. "I don't know. The Devourers are tough and there are a lot of them. But here's what I do know, they've never faced humanity before. They think your world is an easy target. They're wrong. And we're going to teach them that lesson." "Why do you fight so readily?" Lyra asked. "The galaxy thinks humans are dangerous. Aggressive. But I've watched your people these past weeks. You're kind. Creative. You laugh at things that aren't funny because it helps. Why are you also so good at violence?" Kovacs was quiet for a long time. "Because sometimes," she finally said, "the only way to protect kindness is with strength. The only way to preserve peace is to be willing to fight for it. Humans learned that lesson over and over throughout our history. We just hope the rest of the galaxy never has to. What do you think would have happened if the humans hadn't come? Write it in the comments, I want to know what you think." 10 days remaining. The defense grid was complete. Every citizen had an assigned shelter. Human Marines ran drills with the few volunteers who had shown real aptitude, most failed, but a handful of them, those with the right combination of courage and desperation, had learned quickly. Faster than anyone expected. 5 days remaining. The Devourer fleet entered the outer system. Bioships visible now on long-range sensors. Massive organic vessels that pulsed with what could only be described as hunger. 3 days remaining. Civilian evacuations began. Vael citizens filed into the underground shelters, terrified but trusting the people who had worked themselves nearly to death building those shelters, trusting the strangers who had come when no one else would. 1 day remaining. The human fleet moved into defensive positions. The Iron Meridian sat at the center, fighter bays open and ready. The Prometheus ascending withdrew to high orbit, its construction arms now loaded with emergency repair equipment. The Harbinger powered up its weapons for the first time since arriving. Kovacs stood on the bridge surrounded by her crew. Lyra watched from a secondary station, her hands trembling. She had refused to go to the shelter. These were her people. If they faced what was coming, she would face it with them. "All stations report status," Kovacs ordered. "Orbital defense grid at 100%. All batteries loaded and targeted. Fighter squadrons ready for launch. Pilots are eager, Commander. Marine battalions are at defensive positions. They say they're ready to show these things what humanity thinks of uninvited guests." Kovacs allowed herself a small smile. "All right. The Devourers think this is going to be easy. They think the Vael are helpless prey. Let's show them what happens when humanity decides to answer a call for help." She looked directly at Lyra. "Ambassador. Get to the shelter. This is going to get loud. I'm staying, Lyra said. These are my people. Kovacs nodded. Something passed across her face, respect, maybe. Or recognition. Suit yourself. Welcome to a human war, Ambassador. It's not pretty. But we're damn good at it. The Devourer fleet entered orbital space. 200 bioships strong. Each one oozing with organic weapons and carrying thousands of ground troops. They had done this before, 17 times before, on 17 different worlds. They expected resistance to be minimal. They expected to be feeding within hours. They were about to learn what they had never learned before. Chief Engineer Tobias Webb stood in the Prometheus Ascending's command center, watching the sensors. He opened a channel to Kovacs. Commander. They're in range of the defense grid. Fire at will. The space around Lyra's homeworld erupted. The first railgun round crossed the distance to the Devourer fleet in under 2 seconds. It struck a bioship amidships, punched through organic armor that had evolved over millions of years to be nearly indestructible. The ship convulsed. Then exploded from the inside out as kinetic energy tore it apart at the molecular level. Then the rest of the grid opened fire. The void between the planet and the Devourer fleet became a storm. Hundreds of railgun rounds streaking at a significant fraction of light speed. The bioships had maintained a tight formation, efficient for coordinated assault, fatal for absorbing concentrated fire. The first salvo destroyed 37 ships outright. Another dozen were crippled. The Devourers, which had consumed 17 worlds without serious opposition, started bleeding. On the bridge, Kovacs watched the tactical display. Second salvo. Target the capital ships. The defense platforms adjusted. The larger Devourer vessels, each one capable of carrying hundreds of thousands of ground troops, found themselves under concentrated fire. Their thick armor held for a few seconds. Then failed. Direct hit on target Alpha 7. She's breaking apart. Target Alpha 12 is venting atmosphere. Weapons offline. Target Alpha 4 is attempting to regenerate hull damage. Recommend sustained fire. Granted, Kovacs said. Burn it down. Lyra stood behind Kovacs, her face pale. She had seen the platforms being built. She had watched the humans work for weeks. Nothing had prepared her for this, for what concentrated human firepower actually looked like when it was released. They're dying, she whispered. So many of them are dying. Kovacs didn't look away from her displays. They came here to eat your people, Ambassador. Every one of those ships carries enough troops to strip a continent of life. I won't apologize for defending your world. The Devourer fleet began to scatter. It was the tactically correct response, but it had come too late. The human defense grid had been designed by people who had studied every Devourer attack for the past decade. The firing patterns adjusted automatically, tracking dispersing bioships with machine precision. They're launching fighter analogs, a bridge officer reported. Thousands of them. Launch hours. All squadrons, weapons free. Show them how humans fly. The Iron Meridian's launch bays opened and fighters poured into space. Human pilots, linked to their machines through neural interfaces that made the craft extensions of their bodies, met the Devourer swarm with aggressive precision. The contrast was stark. Devourer fighters moved in instinctive patterns controlled by hive mind coordination. Human pilots moved with individual creativity and tactical flexibility. Within minutes the space around the planet became a chaotic battlefield, and the humans were winning it. When missiles ran out, they switched to guns. When ammunition depleted, some pilots made choices that had defined humanity since long before they reached the stars. They rammed their fighters into larger Devourer vessels, ejecting at the last possible second. Pilot Kowalski just took out a Devourer frigate analog with a collision run, the tactical officer reported. We have his beacon. Recovery shuttle is en route. Kovacs didn't look up. What's his status? He's laughing, Commander. Says he's got 2 more ejection seats if we need him to do it again. Despite everything, despite the horror of the tactical display, Kovacs smiled. That's humanity for you, Ambassador. We're insane enough to ram starships and laugh about it. But the Devourers had numbers. For every bioship destroyed, 3 more pressed forward. They had learned their lesson about tight formations, now they spread across a wide front, making concentrated fire less effective. Their strategy was simple, overwhelm through sheer mass. It had worked on 17 worlds. Devourer fleet is attempting orbital insertion, the sensor officer called out. They're going to make landfall. Let them come, Kovacs said. Chief Webb. Are your people ready? Chief Engineer Tobias Webb stood in his command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing every defensive installation on the planet's surface. His engineering teams had worked for 25 days straight. Sleeping in shifts. Eating at their workstations. Pushing past every limit. All ground installations online and operational, Webb reported. Bunker cities are sealed, civilian population is secure, artillery batteries are loaded, Marines are in position. He cracked his knuckles. We're ready to introduce them to human defensive engineering. The Devourer bioships began their descent. Massive, pulsating vessels that looked like diseased organs fell through the atmosphere. They carried millions of ground troops, beetle soldiers the size of armored vehicles, each one capable of tearing apart a building with their natural weapons. They were bred for overwhelming assault. For throwing mass at problems until the problems disappeared. They hit the first layer of defense at 10,000 meters. Surface-to-air missile batteries opened fire. Dozens of Devourer landing craft detonated in the upper atmosphere. More kept coming. They landed in waves on the largest continent. Millions of warriors pouring from ruptured bioships, scuttling forward with terrifying speed. Heading for the nearest city. Heading for the shelters. Ready to begin the harvest. Then they discovered what Tobias Webb had spent 2 weeks building into the soil beneath their feet. The ground exploded. Webb had mined the entire approach zone. Entire divisions of Devourer warriors simply ceased to exist. The survivors pushed forward, driven by hive-mind commands that could not process the concept of retreat. They ran directly into automated turret lines that Webb's teams had installed every 100 meters. AI-assisted weapons, fast enough to track individual targets, smart enough to prioritize threats. The Devourer line staggered. Pressed on. They were tough, redundant, and numerous. A few thousand casualties meant nothing. Then they met the third line. Sergeant Major Dustin Callahan lay in a fortified position, watching the advance through his rifle scope. Around him, his squad did the same, veterans of a dozen conflicts, every one of them a volunteer. A lot of people had thought this mission was suicide. That was fine with them. Contact in 30 seconds, someone murmured. Headshots only, Callahan said, his voice completely steady. These things can lose limbs and keep going. You need to hit the neural cluster behind the forward carapace. Nice and easy. Sarge, there's like 10,000 of them, a younger Marine said, voice tight. Then you'd better not miss. The Marines opened fire. Not spray and pray. Not panic and run. Aimed, controlled, precise, human marksmanship honed over centuries of warfare, meeting alien biology in a test of efficiency versus numbers. The Devourers fell in waves. But more kept coming. Reloading. Switching to grenades. And then, the lines met. The Devourers reached them, and the battle became something that defied clean description. These aliens had evolved for melee warfare. Their natural weapons were designed to tear through armor. But humans had evolved for something different, adaptability. Ruthless efficiency. When rifles ran empty, they switched to shotguns. When shotguns ran dry, pistols. When pistols were empty, knives. When knives broke, hands, and whatever else was nearby. In the command bunker, Commander Dallin Vor watched the feeds with something beyond shock. He had no words for what he was seeing. "They're insane," he whispered. "They're magnificent," Lyra corrected, standing beside him. She had refused to stay in orbit. She was watching her world's survival happen in real time, and she would not look away. Then the reports came in. The Devourers were breaking through. Northern approach. Heading for Shelter Complex 7, 3,000 civilians inside, no reinforcements available. Every human soldier was already fully engaged. "Dispatch reinforcements," Vor ordered, knowing there were none. "Negative." A voice came over the comms. "Low, controlled, absolutely certain. Callahan. Northern approach is my sector. We'll handle it. Sergeant, you have 14 Marines. The enemy force numbers over 500 Devourer warriors. You need to fall back." A pause. "Respectfully, Commander, that's not happening. These civilians asked for shelter. Humanity doesn't break promises." The channel went silent. Vor pulled up the visual feed from the northern approach and watched. 14 humans positioned themselves between 500 aliens and a shelter full of people they had never met. They used every piece of terrain available. They funneled the enemy into kill zones. They used combined arms, grenades, explosives, anything that delayed the advance. They made noise and movement to seem more numerous than they were. When one Marine went down wounded, another dragged them to cover and kept fighting. When ammunition ran low, they fixed bayonets. The Devourers, expecting easy prey, found something they were not designed to process: humans who simply would not break. Every meter forward cost dozens of warriors. Every second of delay meant more civilians reaching safety deeper in the shelter. The hive mind could not understand it. Why were these creatures fighting so hard for beings that weren't even their own species? By the time reinforcements finally arrived, Callahan was the only one still on his feet. Covered in dust and the aftermath of battle. Surrounded by hundreds of fallen Devourer warriors. His rifle was destroyed. His armor was shredded. He had at least 6 serious wounds. But he was still conscious. Still standing between the entrance and the enemy, armed with nothing but a combat knife. "Shelter is secure," he reported. Then he sat down. The medics were already running. The battle raged for 3 days. The Devourers kept landing troops. Kept pushing. Kept expecting the defenders to break. The humans didn't break. They couldn't afford to. Chief Engineer Webb worked what could only be called miracles, using the Prometheus Ascending's fabrication systems to manufacture ammunition, medical supplies, and replacement parts in real time. His engineers worked in the middle of active combat zones, repairing automated turrets under fire, rebuilding defensive positions while the battle happened around them. One engineer, a woman named Sarah Park, held a critical supply route by herself for 2 hours when her squad was pinned down. She used a construction mech, a machine designed for lifting cargo, as an improvised combat vehicle. In orbit, the battle continued. The Devourer bioships kept coming. The human fleet kept destroying them. But the numbers were doing what numbers always do when they're large enough: they were telling. The Iron Meridian had lost a third of its fighter complement. 2 orbital defense platforms had been completely destroyed. Casualties mounted. And on the 3rd day, Commander Kovacs stood on the bridge reviewing reports and realized the truth. They were losing. Not quickly. Not obviously. But inevitably. The Devourers had too many ships. Too many warriors. Humanity was fighting with everything it had. Eventually, the math would win. "Commander." The tactical officer's voice was quiet. "Devourer capital ships are forming up. They're preparing for a massive orbital bombardment." Kovacs understood immediately. The shelters could withstand conventional attacks. But if the Devourers were willing to sacrifice dozens of their own ships to punch through the defenses and target the shelters directly, millions would die. She stood still for a long moment. Then she opened a channel. Harbinger. Commander Kovacs speaking. Authorization code Kovacs Theta 9. I need your main gun. A long pause. Everyone on the bridge knew what that meant. Captain Ren Morrison's voice came back carefully. Commander. You know what you're asking. The targeting requirements, I know, Captain. But if we don't break that formation right now, we lose the planet. All of it. Every Marine. Every civilian we've been protecting for 25 days. I need that gun. Another pause. Understood. Powering up the main cannon. We'll need 15 minutes to charge. You have 10, Kovacs said. And closed the channel. She turned to Lyra, who had been listening with growing horror. Ambassador. I need you to order a planet-wide alert. Everyone underground. As deep as possible. What I'm about to do is going to light up your sky. What are you doing? Kovacs's voice was completely level. I'm using the biggest gun humanity ever built. And I'm praying I don't miss. Webb heard the announcement from his command center and looked at the tactical display. Saw the Harbinger moving into position. And started laughing, exhausted, disbelieving, and completely genuine. Those magnificent people, he said to no one in particular. They're actually doing it. He opened a channel to all human forces. All personnel, this is Chief Engineer Webb. Get underground right now. Forget what you're doing. Get below ground and put something solid over your head. The Harbinger is about to show these things why humans don't build weapons for show. In the medical bay, Callahan, barely conscious, heavily bandaged, heard the announcement and smiled. About time, he said quietly. I was getting tired of the fair fight. The Harbinger completed its positioning. The ship had been designed for one purpose, breaking enemy formations that conventional weapons couldn't handle. Its main gun was a mass driver that channeled energy on a scale that made most species' weapons look like toys. Captain Morrison sat in his command chair. His crew moved with the practiced calm of people who had trained for this moment while hoping they'd never need it. Main gun charged to 90%. Target lock acquired on the Devourer capital formation. 95. 100. Ready to fire, Captain. Morrison took a breath. All human ships, clear the firing lane. Vael forces, get your people underground. He opened a fleet-wide channel. For humanity. And for those who asked us for shelter. Fire. The Harbinger fired its main gun, and the universe answered with thunder. The projectile left the ship at 12% the speed of light. It crossed the distance to the Devourer capital formation in under 3 seconds. The first capital ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. The projectile passed through it like it wasn't there, kinetic energy vaporizing organic matter instantly. The ship behind it suffered the same fate. The one behind that. The plasma trailed superheated matter from the destroyed vessels and spread outward in a cone of temperatures normally found inside stars. 6 more capital ships found themselves bathed in that heat. Organic armor that had evolved over millions of years to resist conventional weapons meant absolutely nothing. 18 capital ships gone in less than 4 seconds. On the bridge of the Iron Meridian, the tactical display updated in real time. The tactical officer's voice was quiet with something close to awe. 18 confirmed kills. The Devourer formation is scattering, Commander. Kovacs let herself have one moment of cold satisfaction. Then she snapped back to work. Don't let them regroup. All fighters pursue. Orbital batteries fire at will. I want every ship that's running to think twice about coming back. The human fighters, defensive for 3 days, watching friends die, watching ammunition dwindle, heard the order and responded the only way humans respond when you finally let them off the leash. Lieutenant Amy Chen, flying on neural interface, locked onto a Devourer frigate trying to escape. Missile racks empty. Guns still had rounds. She closed to point-blank range, a distance that made her wingman scream warnings over the comm. Fox 4, what are you doing? You're inside their weapon range. They don't have weapons anymore, Chen replied, watching the frigate break apart. They just have fear. And they should be afraid. They attacked the wrong planet. On the ground, the Devourer forces received no new orders. The hive mind, its capital ships destroyed or fleeing, lost coordination across millions of warriors simultaneously. The beetle soldiers, evolved to follow commands without question, found themselves suddenly alone with nothing but their most basic instincts. Some kept fighting. Others froze. Human marines, battered and exhausted, pressed their advantage. Callahan, ignoring every protest from the medical staff, armed himself and returned to the battlefield. Sarge, you need to rest, one of his marines said. I'll rest when they're gone, Callahan replied, loading his weapon. Right now we finish this. What do you think happens next for a civilization that learns to fight? Do they stay peaceful? Write in the comments. I want to hear your take. The Devourer Queen Mind, distributed across the surviving bioships, made a calculation. In 10,000 years of existence, across hundreds of worlds, the Devourers had never retreated. They had never needed to. They overwhelmed resistance through numbers and consumed everything in their path. But evolution requires survival. And survival requires learning. The Queen Mind issued an unprecedented command. Full retreat. Faster than light travel. Abandon the system. Flee to dark space. The cost was enormous. Abandoning the ground forces meant losing millions of warriors. But the alternative was extinction. The remaining Devourer capital ships engaged their organic FTL drives and vanished, leaving behind nearly 3 million ground forces with no way off the planet. Those abandoned warriors faced something their species had never encountered before. Commander Vor watched from the command bunker and made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Broadcast a message on all frequencies. Tell them to lay down their weapons and gather in designated areas. If they comply, we will not kill them. A human officer stared at him. Commander, these things were trying to eat your people. And you taught us something, Vor replied. Humanity fights with incredible violence. But also with mercy, when the fight is won. If we kill helpless enemies, we become the monsters. He looked at Lyra, who nodded. We are Vael. We choose peace when peace is possible. It was controversial. Many Devourer warriors couldn't understand surrender and had to be dealt with. But thousands did comply. For the first time in their species' history, Devourer warriors experienced something that wasn't conquest. The battle for Lyra's world was over. The humans had won. Barely. The casualty reports came in over the following days. 40% of human fighters destroyed or damaged beyond repair. 2,300 Marines dead. Another 4,000 wounded. The Iron Meridian had suffered critical damage. Several orbital platforms completely destroyed. But the planet stood. Of 8 million Vael civilians, 30,000 had died, mostly from shelter collapses during bombardment or injuries sustained during the evacuation. It was a tragedy. Measured against the extinction the Devourers would have delivered, it was something close to a miracle. Ambassador Lyra found Commander Kovacs in the medical bay 3 days after the last shot was fired. Kovacs was refusing treatment until her people were cared for. She was covered in bandages and running on something that had already burned past exhaustion into a strange second energy. Commander. You need medical attention. I'm fine. You're not. How are my people? Alive. Because of you. Lyra sat beside her. Commander. Why did you do this? We are not your people. We had nothing to offer you. You could have sent a token force and left. Instead you fought like we were your own. Why? Kovacs was quiet for a long moment. Ambassador. Do you know what humanity's greatest strength is? It's not our technology. It's not our tactics. She watched the medics work on a Marine who had lost a leg. It's that we're too stubborn to know when something is impossible. You asked for shelter. Everyone else heard an evacuation request. We heard, protect them. She turned to look at Lyra directly. Before we reached the stars, humans fought each other for thousands of years. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times. But we also learned something. The cost of helping someone is always less than the cost of watching them die and doing nothing. Always. Your people sacrificed so much, Lyra said. Tears were flowing now. In Vael culture, tears were sacred, shed only for the deepest emotions. That's what sacrifice means, Kovacs said gently. Doing something that costs you because it's the right thing to do. She paused. Your people gave us something in return. You don't realize it yet. What could we possibly give you? Purpose. Kovacs's voice was quiet. For a long time, humans worried we'd become conquerors when we reached space. That all our capacity for violence would become predation. This showed us we can be something else instead. Protectors. You gave us a reason to be strong. That's worth more than you know. A medical officer finally convinced Kovacs to lie down for treatment. As the medics worked, she kept talking. The galaxy thinks humans are aggressive. They're right. But they don't understand that we can choose where that aggression points. We're dangerous to the Devourers. We're dangerous to anyone who threatens innocent beings. But we're the best friends you could ask for. Lyra stayed until the treatment was finished. Around them the bay bustled, human doctors treating patients with the same care regardless of species. Vael volunteers, untrained but eager, fetching supplies and sitting with the wounded. In the aftermath of violence, two species learning to exist in the same space. Chief Engineer Webb was already planning the reconstruction. The Prometheus ascending, damaged but functional, began manufacturing materials for rebuilding. Defensive platforms that survived would be upgraded. The bunker cities would become permanent infrastructure. Lyra's world would emerge from this war stronger than it had ever been. Webb visited one of the surface battle sites while the automated clearing systems worked. The landscape was cratered and scarred. He stood in the middle of it and saw something else entirely. We're going to help you rebuild all of this, he told the engineers with him. But we're also going to teach you how to build defensively. How to maintain weapon systems. How to be ready if something like this happens again. We are a peaceful people, one of them said quietly. We do not want to become warriors. You don't have to be, Webb replied. But you need to be prepared. Peace is wonderful. But peace without the ability to defend it is just asking to be a victim. We'll teach you to be strong. What you do with that strength is up to you. 1 week after the battle ended, the Iron Meridian prepared to depart. The ship was barely flight-worthy, held together by emergency patches and Webb's engineering miracles. But Kovacs insisted on leaving. The Vael needed to begin healing, and the human presence was a reminder of trauma. Lyra stood in the orbital station's docking bay, watching the crew prepare. She had prepared a speech. Something worthy of what these people had done. When the moment came, all of it disappeared. Thank you, she said. Thank you for everything. Kovacs smiled. The tiredness was still there. So was something genuine underneath it. You're welcome, Ambassador. Take care of your people. And remember, peace is precious. But defending it isn't weakness. It's responsibility. Will we see you again? Maybe. The galaxy is a big place. But if you ever need help again, really need it, send word. Kovacs turned toward the boarding ramp. That's what friends do. The Iron Meridian departed. Followed by the Prometheus ascending. Followed by the Harbinger, its great gun cold and silent again. They left behind a transformed world. Defense platforms. Trained defenders. The knowledge that the void wasn't empty and indifferent, that somewhere out there, at least one species had decided that letting others die alone was not acceptable. They left behind something else. Something harder to measure. Hope. In the command bunker that would become the planet's first military headquarters, Commander Nadia Voss stood before a memorial wall. Names were being engraved, every human who had died defending this world. It would take weeks to complete. Beside the human names, Vael names, their own people who had fallen in the chaos of evacuation and bombardment. We will remember, Voss said quietly. We will tell our children. They will tell theirs. We will remember the day humanity answered a call for shelter and sent us commanders to lead, builders to fortify, and a siegebreaker to defend. We will remember that we are not alone. The Devourer fleet, what remained of it, fled into dark space. They had learned that some prey fought back. Some prey had friends who were extraordinarily good at violence. 3 months after the Battle of Lyra's world, Ambassador Nadia Voss stood before the Galactic Council. The chamber had been debating human actions for weeks, their tactics, their methods, their audacity in intervening without multilateral authorization. Voss listened to all of it. Then she stood. For weeks you've debated humanity's actions. You've questioned our methods. Our morals. Our right to intervene. She looked around the chamber slowly. I have one question for you. Where were you? The chamber went silent. Ambassador Lyra Solon stood where I'm standing now and begged for help. 17 worlds had already fallen. Millions were already dead. And you did nothing. You offered sympathy. You offered evacuation options. You offered words. Humanity offered ships, soldiers, and blood. She paused. You call us aggressive. Yes. You call us dangerous. Absolutely. But we're dangerous to slavers. We're dangerous to world eaters. We're dangerous to anyone who threatens innocent beings. If that makes us outlaws in your eyes, so be it. We'll be outlaws who sleep soundly. She sat down. The council erupted. The humans had made their position clear. They would not apologize. They would not promise to follow rules written by beings who valued procedure over lives. 4 other species, watching the debate in silence, quietly sent messages to Earth requesting military assistance. Humanity had proven something the galaxy needed to know. Some species will fight for you. Not for profit. Not for territory. Not because they have anything to gain. Simply because it's right. The Devourer fleet, wherever it fled, carried with it a new understanding. The galaxy had changed. There was a new predator now. One that didn't hunt for food or resources. Humanity hunted monsters. And they were terrifyingly, irreversibly good at it. Above Lyra's homeworld, in stationary orbit, a single gift remained, a defense platform maintained by a joint crew. A reminder, and a promise. You are not alone. And you never will be again. Ambassador Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking her capital city and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere up there, human ships were still on patrol. Somewhere below her, human engineers were teaching her people to maintain their new defenses. She thought about the galaxy she had known. Where the strong consumed the weak and the peaceful died alone. Then she thought about the new one. Where at least one species had decided that wasn't acceptable. 1 year after the battle, the memorial dedication drew crowds from across the planet. The monument stood 50 meters tall, 3 figures carved from the deep blue stone found only in the mountains of the southern continent. A commander studying a tactical display. A builder holding tools. A soldier standing watch. The sculptor had captured something essential in each face, not triumph, not heroism in the dramatic sense. Just people doing what needed to be done. At the base, names were engraved in stone that would last for thousands of years. 2,300 human names. 30,000 Vael names. Lyra stood before it for a long time before the ceremony began. The stone was cold under her hand. The names were just letters, just marks in rock. And yet they were also everything, every life that had been interrupted, every future that had been redirected into absence. She thought about what Kovacs had said. Strength is a tool, not a purpose. She thought about what Webb had built in 25 days, and what he was building now that there was time to do it properly. She thought about Callahan standing in a corridor with a combat knife while children ran deeper into the dark. And she thought about her granddaughter, born 8 months after the battle, who would grow up in a world that had defense platforms and memorial gardens and a training academy and an orbital shipyard where the first Vael warship was already under construction, a frigate-class vessel whose keel had been laid with ceremony and whose name had been chosen by public vote. They called it the Remembrance. Because forgetting was not an option. Because the past was not a burden but a foundation. Because 30,000 names deserved to be more than silence. At the ceremony, Lyra spoke last. She had prepared extensive notes. She set them aside. We asked for shelter, she said. The galaxy offered us sympathy and evacuation routes. Humanity offered us something they called help, and turned out to mean everything. They didn't save us by fighting for us. They saved us by fighting with us, and then teaching us to fight for ourselves. There is a difference. It is the most important difference. The humans who fell here were 2,300 individuals. Each one a complete life, a complete history, a complete future that ended on a world they had never seen before, for people they had known for less than a month. They came because someone asked. They stayed because they believed. We will honor them not by becoming what they were, soldiers, warriors, engineers of destruction. We will honor them by becoming what they tried to be. Strong enough to protect what matters. Wise enough to know what matters. Defenders. Not conquerors. Guardians. Not hunters. That is the lesson. That is the legacy. That is what we carry forward. She paused. And when the time comes, and it will come, for some species somewhere in this galaxy, when someone stands before a council and begs for help, and the excuses begin to flow, we will be the ones who say, we're coming. The Remembrance launched 3 months later to a crowd that filled every observation deck in orbit. Its captain was one of the original volunteers, a woman who had learned combat during the battle and spent the following year studying everything humanity could teach her. She stood on the bridge as the ship's engines came online for the first time, running her hands across controls that responded to her touch with a precision that felt almost personal. How does she feel? Lieutenant Mira asked over the comm. Like she was built for this, the captain replied. Like she was always supposed to exist. She guided the Remembrance away from the construction cradle, into open orbital space. Below them, the planet glowed blue and green and white, beautiful in the way that things are most beautiful when you understand what it costs to keep them. All systems optimal, her navigator reported. Weapons online. Shields at full capacity. The captain looked out at the stars for a long moment. The Remembrance is ready for duty. Somewhere across the galaxy, the Devourers hid in dark space and did not return. Somewhere across the galaxy, other species learned the story of what had happened here and made decisions, about their own defenses, about their own values, about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. Somewhere on Earth, Commander Zara Kovacs sat in a quiet room and wrote in a journal she never showed anyone, trying to find words for something that didn't fit neatly into words. She wrote, "We went because they asked. We stayed because it mattered. We left because they didn't need us anymore. That last part, that's the hardest part. Not the battle. Not the casualties. Not the days that never quite leave you alone. The hardest part is leaving when the work is done. Because it means the work is done. Because they're standing on their own. That's the whole point. That's always been the whole point. And above the homeworld of the Vael, the remembrance turned toward the stars, toward whatever was out there, whatever needed facing, whatever came next. Not searching for war. Ready for it. There is a difference. It is the most important difference. Thank you, humanity, Lyra whispered to the sunset. For teaching us that we deserve to survive.